So on October 10th, Food and Nutrition Services, FNS, which is a part of the USDA, they issued a letter that said, due to the shutdown, there are resources to fund SNAP through the end of October, but not beyond. So starting November 1, should this government shutdown continue, there will not be money for SNAP, which for Alaska, just for the month of November, that creates almost a $24 million gap.
How many folks in Alaska rely on SNAP for their food?
1 in 10.
So 1 in 10 people would not be able to afford their groceries for the month of November.
1 in 10 people, at least, remember we talked about the tip of the iceberg, invisible hunger, at least 1 in 10 people are going to have a heck of a time in November. Yes.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Rachael Miller, the Chief Advocacy Officer for the Food Bank of Alaska. The Food Bank of Alaska was founded in 1979 by a group of Anchorage churches and community volunteers. It operates under the belief that no one should go hungry. They partner with over 150 organizations to provide food to nearly 20,000 Alaskans a week. Rachael first began coming to Alaska 15 years ago to work in commercial fishing. She has worked on food policy in Benin, West Africa, taught at Alaska Pacific University for 9 years, and has been the Chief Advocacy Officer at the Food Bank since January 2024.
Rachael Miller, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rep. Gray.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in a little suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. In Northeast Ohio, I grew up on Lake Erie and had a pretty, quote-unquote, regular Midwest life.
What did your parents do?
Oh, my parents are definitely why I am the way I am. My dad has been in quality control for construction management forever. So he's the guy who taught me how to get everything in writing, keep a paper trail, measure twice, cut once. And my mom is a ceramic artist, and she's been a creative her whole life. And she's the one who taught me it's important to be loud and stand up for what you want in life. Growing up in my household, food was always a priority. I remember when I was 5 years old, my dad got laid off, and it was for some months, and they went into credit card debt. This is in the 80s, and they really had to make it work. But food and nutrition, in retrospect, was always a priority for my mom. And so it was, I didn't have her find sugar till I was 5. She made sure that I had nutrition available and that my flavor palette developed so I would eat good food for the rest of my life. And college years aside, it really worked. Now in my 40s, I value food in such a different way than if that wasn't the way that I was raised. And so I'm so grateful for that and recognize that is not what everyone gets access to. And that's part of why I do the work I do at Food Bank of Alaska.
What's your role at Food Bank of Alaska?
So I'm our Chief Advocacy Officer, and I'm the second person in this position. Our current CEO, Kara Durr, she started this work at Food Bank of Alaska around 13 years ago. And she came in doing a big hunger study around the state. She kicked off working with the food bank to become the fiscal sponsor for the Alaska Food Coalition. So the Food Coalition is a part of Food Bank, but all this to say is that Kara really set the stage for Food Bank of Alaska to engage in policy work. And what I've learned in the last 2 years of working at Food Bank of Alaska is it is not business as usual for food banks to engage in policy work. There are many food banks around the country who say, we feed the line, we get food out the door, and that's what we do. And it's not advantageous for them at all because they don't have good relationships with their state agencies or their congressional delegation. And Kara did an enormous amount of work to set Food Bank of Alaska up to be truly a nonpartisan voice in the anti-hunger work in the state.
Well, I want to talk more about Food Bank, but back to you.
Yeah.
Grew up outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and went off to college.
Yeah. Neither of my parents had a chance to finish college. And so I was a first-gen college kid, but I didn't recognize that going into it. And I was very excited, like so many kids in the 80s, about marine biology. So my parents were like, okay, well, you go figure that out. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And at the end of the day, I landed at Kent State University, which was a great, huge public school. I'm a state school kid. I love a big college campus. I love university life. And so I did 2 undergraduate degrees in marketing and psychology. I am fascinated by consumer behavior and why we buy and why we behave the way we do. And I did that for 4 years. And then 6 weeks after graduation, I left for the Peace Corps. So I moved to Benin, West Africa for 2.5 years. Right.
What was that like?
When I came back from my service, everyone was like, how was Africa? And I was like, what? It's a huge question. To sum it up now, a couple decades later, it was the coolest thing I had the chance to do. And it changed my life. I couldn't go out and see the things that I saw and not be changed
What'd you
forever.
see?
I lived in a really cool community. It was very classic catalog, West Africa Peace Corps, red dirt road. I carried water on my head for 2 years. I did my laundry by hand. All the imagery was very aligned with what I was expecting, but the people and the connections, the flavors, the hospitality, and the way that infrastructure and goods move around that part of the world unexpectedly really prepared me to come to Alaska. So I always say I learned more in West Africa about how to work in Alaska than I did in a suburb of Cleveland, for sure.
And how did you get to Alaska?
I was in the Peace Corps. I met a woman at the end of my service. I said, boy, I've had this incredible experience. I feel really lucky. I want to leverage it. I can't go to an office. I cannot 9 to 5. I will get fired. And she said, you should get on a fishing boat. It's like, okay. So she got me on a boat and I fished 2 winter or A seasons out of Dutch Harbor on a pollock trawler. So I learned a ton about commercial fishing. I learned a ton about the Bering Sea. I thought for a second I wanted to be a captain or, a deck boss, and that is some work. So I did that for a couple winters. I ended up doing some guiding down in Cooper Landing.
And I guess what year are we talking about where you were in Dutch Harbor and Cooper Landing?
I fished 2009 and 10, and I
Got it.
guided 2009, 10, 11.
Gotcha. And did you end up staying in Alaska at that time?
I had a very back and forth seasonal relationship with
And you're
the
going back
place.
to Ohio?
Going back to Ohio, there was fishing in the winter, guiding in the summer, traveling, seeing friends. I had some connections in Colorado, but I ended up leaving after 2011 and going to Colorado to get my master's. So I got my MBA in Fort Collins.
Then what happened?
So I got my MBA was all about social enterprise and learning how business can be a tool for social and environmental change. That really spoke to me. And I was like, if we're doing capitalism, I want to know everything about it. I want to know how this model works and how to best fight for what I want. Just like I said, my mom really raised me to do. Then I ended up collaborating with some cohort mates in my program, and we wrote this grant, and we ended up being one of 10 out of 2,400 teams selected by the Rockefeller Foundation to do a pilot of social enterprise. And so I went back to Benin. I went back to West Africa 5 years later, and this was 2014. So I went back to Benin in 2014 and launched a healthy street food pilot over there.
How did it go?
That was the hardest thing I've ever done.
I guess did they already have street food that wasn't healthy?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
Street food is one of the oldest professions in the world. It is everywhere. It is ever present. Nothing that I did was new or innovative, but often in areas where there's lower quality sanitation. The literacy rate in Benin was very low, particularly for women. And so creating opportunities for women was what we were going to do, was create opportunities for women who had traditionally been exploited. A lot of the bar workers and the restaurant workers in the area I lived in, there were no worker rights. They were working 7 days a week. There was a lot of sex trafficking happening in these places. And so we were like, what if we create the McDonald's of healthy food and we do it through a micro franchise model? And we did a ton of market research, a lot of surveys. We talked to 1,000 people about what they want in healthy food. And it turns out people really don't like getting diarrhea. And they really like healthy, but delicious street food. And that was the key that we learned. So, I learned yet again, it's really hard to make nutrition sexy. The program we piloted for a year, and the whole goal was to turn it into a program for Beninese people. The goal was never for me to move there. And the project ran for 2.5 years. We created an entity that was Mama Cart's Benin. That was the name of that organization. We did it in Benin. And I moved on to their board of advisors. And everybody who touched the organization went on to do their own thing. We did end up closing the project. But boy, it is lonely and humbling to run a business.
So healthy street food didn't take off in Benin?
I think, what we did was call attention to public health and sanitation. I think that we had a great flash in the pan moment of having a lot of momentum around talking about washing your hands. Why is time and temperature important when you're looking at healthy food? It's not just about nutrition. And the organic conversation had just kicked off in Benin. So we were talking about all these things as they were front and center in people's minds. I would say Benin has been rapidly developing like a lot of the African continent. There's a lot of drive internally for folks to build from within. And it was cool to be a little tiny part of that.
What did you do after that?
I moved to Colorado and I thought I wanted to be a university professor. So I taught marketing for a couple years at a university and really thought hard on my work in the world and what I wanted to do. And it always goes back to food. Food has been the theme through my seemingly non-circuitous career. And I knew I didn't want to be a farmer. That is super hard. I did not want to commercial fish anymore. That was super hard. And I was worried about my body. I was worried about relying on my body to make money. So I taught for a couple years. And then Alaska, really, anybody who's a transplant up here knows that she kind of calls you home. And that is how it felt. The stars aligned. I came up in 2016 to the Alaska Food Policy Council conference. It was just getting started at the time. I think it was the second one that they had done. And I came up, and then a couple weeks later, I came up to interview at Alaska Pacific University. So for the last 9 years, I was a business professor at APU.
I'm wondering if there was any particular experience that happened when you were commercial fishing out of Dutch Harbor, the summers that you spent in Cooper Landing, that implanted like that Alaska was a place that you wanted to be.
Yes. Oh, daily, the smell. The smell for me was like, oh, that feels like home. And that's just my personal call to Alaska. But I think the big moments that showed me I can do work up here and that I want to do work up here. The first bag of fish I ever saw pulled up onto the deck of this boat that I was on, I was like, how are there any fish left in the ocean? This is bananas. And, I was in the factory. I worked on packing boxes of fish and just thought about that for the whole 2.5-month season. I was like, I know we're on a small boat. I was on a 240-foot trawler. We were not a mothership. And so that really rolled around in my head. You get to talk to the fisheries observers who are on there making sure we're not taking illegal bycatch and just learned about how this industry works. And the second season, I came back and the first bag came up on the deck and I was like, money. And I was like, oh, that's how that happens. That's how we continue to fish in a lot of places around the world over the maximum sustainable yield that wild stocks can produce. So then I was like, well, Alaska is the voice in this global conversation, right? For the best managed wild species in the world. So I was like, what? I want to get involved in that. And then I started to look into fisheries and was like, this is a wild world that is wildly politically loaded. I didn't have the chops to dig into it on a policy level, but it was my gateway into understanding a little bit more about Alaska's food system. Why is seafood caught here, shipped around the world to process and then shipped back here? Things like that still don't make sense to me until you start to dig into market forces and understand labor. And that's where I've arrived at today in looking at our food system and why it is still so hard to get consistent access to fresh food up here.
When did you start working with the food bank?
Yeah. So my experience with the food bank, let's see. I volunteered at a Thanksgiving blessing distribution. It's an event that Food Bank does every year and has for the last 20 years. And this job wasn't on my radar yet, but it was wild to see the amount of need that there was, cars backed up in streets for a really cool distribution of full Thanksgiving meals in boxes that people could drive through and just get a little help, for the holidays. That's how I got into Food Bank. So my friend was like, hey, do you want to come volunteer at Thanksgiving blessing? And I was like, sure. And that was like, anytime you look behind the curtain at anything, for me, right, that first bag of fish that came up on deck, I was like, wow, I need to see things to understand impact. And seeing the Thanksgiving blessing need, I was like, wow.
And what year are we talking?
This was 2023.
Okay.
Thanksgiving.
So just a couple years ago.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So that happened. And I just seeing cars backed up into the streets for, a box of food should be striking. It should show us that there is incredible need in our community that is often missed in the number count. It is often missed in the statistics that we share often. 1 in 7 Alaskans experience hunger and 1 in 5 kids. And as I started to put those pieces together, I was like, okay, I've been teaching in the classroom for a long time. I teach about marketing. Food has always been my lens on the stories and anecdotes I share and the examples I use. But it was time for me to really think about working more directly on the problems that I would talk about. And I had very fortunately been able to take an 18-month sabbatical through my APU work, and it was all about food security. And I came back and a friend said, how you doing? And I was like, not good. I'm really feeling the need to work on this. And I ran into Kara and she said, hey, we've got some staff transitions. There's this opening. And I started in January 2024.
You just said 1 in 7 Alaskans experience hunger, 1 in 5 Alaska children experience hunger. Can you talk about Anchorage and then compare that to the rest of the state?
Can. What I point people often towards is Feeding America's Map the Meal Gap. And you can break down hunger by borough. So you can look at the Mat-Su borough, you can look at Kena, you can look at Anchorage, you can look around the state. And that's where, if folks are looking to find their own borough hunger information, Map the Meal Gap is the best resource. Map.feedingamerica.org.
Map.feedingamerica.org.
Correct.
Okay. The reason why I brought it up is a couple years ago, maybe, I flew to Bethel to look at what was happening with bypass mail and our food system, where large pallets of food were getting left in hangars in Bethel.
Yes.
So that Amazon packages, which took priority, were going out. And so
I remember you working on this.
yeah,
Yes.
we unpacked food in Bethel where all the berries were rotten. And because of the way that the stores had ordered it, they weren't going to get reimbursed for that food. And so something that I don't think people understand, it's like the price of groceries in remote Alaska is factoring in the cost of food that never made it to the shelves.
You have to account for spoilage and waste. This is the model.
And we're talking like this has been going on for decades. Why isn't it getting better? I think that's the question. And I was in Bethel, which is a hub.
Yes.
So you talk about like Hooper Bay.
Yeah.
You talk about like someplace that's got to get that food from Bethel out to a rural village. I mean, they don't buy fruit. They don't buy vegetables, not because they don't want their kids to have healthy fruits and vegetables, but because it's so gross.
Yes. Yes. So many folks you talk to who have, moved to bigger cities, who grew up in rural Alaska, the flavor palette, I know that you have a preference for canned milk or powdered milk. That's a little bit different of a transition than going from, someone described it to me as flaccid zucchini and rotten berries. You're never going to try that again. That's a horrific experience for your palate. It makes sense why you wouldn't want to pay for that. You get a whole case of strawberries and you're going to eat a couple strawberries out of that. I have to eat my raspberries same day in Anchorage. It's just not an option for rural Alaska. And your point about it is 2025. Why can't we figure this out? So many reports have been written. So much dialogue has happened and a lot of impactful pilots. I feel this state has gone in waves of excitement around greenhouses and high tunnels and gardening and more distributed local food production. I would point anyone to the Alaska Food Policy Council's resource page. They have the history of reports on what's been written here, at least going back to 2012, and ICER at UAA, who wrote a report on food security indicators. And we are at the end of the road. We are way beyond the end of the road for most of our places. And we have increasingly erratic weather patterns, right? We have rising sea tide levels. All of the usual environmental suspects come together to make it hard on the best day to deliver food around Alaska. And then you throw in increasingly what we're seeing, policy changes, policy uncertainty, grant funding freezes, and folks who have tried to do a little more local food security initiatives, right? These greenhouse projects, maybe local procurement, buying from someone else in the state. So it's already here, which means it's fresher, which means it has a longer shelf life. Some of those projects have recently been impacted by cuts in funding that came from the feds. So it's so frustrating once you see momentum going towards something for more food production, and then we have to axe it. And I know that we shouldn't rely on grant funding forever. That's what one school of thought says, but that is the way we have stood up a lot of really meaningful projects that do create food in this state. So it's a patchwork quilt or a puzzle, right? There is no one silver bullet to food security up here. There is no one panacea. But it certainly is going to take everybody to figure this out. And we learned this in COVID, and we learned this in the 2018 earthquake, that we are one port shutdown away from some pretty extreme risk for hunger in the state.
So speaking of the food bank, for somebody who might be listening who just thinks that you're, I don't know, a pantry or
Yeah.
people go in and pick up a couple of canned goods. What's the main work of the food bank?
Yes, great question. The Food Bank of Alaska, we have a team of 43 people on staff right now. And we are a bank. So we work with a network of over 150 agency partners around the state, way beyond the end of the road. We facilitate direct shipping of commodity foods to some places, but often we receive the food, repackage it, repallet it, and we ship it out. We have a small fleet of vehicles, so we do that in our immediate service area up to the valley, the Matanuska-Susitna Valley, and around Anchorage. And then we have our own little postal office right in the food bank. And so we will get things ready to ship out and to mail out all around the state.
How much food are we shipping and how often?
We're shipping Monday through Friday every day. And last year we distributed almost 8 million pounds.
How many people does 8 million pounds feed?
I don't know if that question matters,
Okay.
right? Like we know how many people are hungry.
Mhm.
We know what we can support as far as distribution. But the missed numbers that happen in hunger are the kids who are living with grandma and grandpa. They're not accounted for in the numbers. It's the caretakers who are next door. The kids come over for lunch and they might be eating out of one of the food distribution boxes. So I think
The true number is probably higher.
true number is always higher. Yes, it is truly a tip of the iceberg when we look at hunger numbers in Alaska. So 1 in 7, yes. But I would say 1 in 7 asterisks. There's more.
And is the food bank's clients primarily these 100 plus remote distribution centers, or does the food bank actually send food directly to people?
We do not do direct client service. We leave that to the folks who are on the ground every day. They know their neighbors and they can best serve their neighbors. We are a facilitator and we are a guide, but we also around Anchorage run food distribution to mobile food pantries. So we have at least right now 8 sites doing mobile food pantry distributions every day. And those sites, there's one at Clark Middle School. You can check our website, foodbankofalaska.org, for a schedule of these. We truck the food there, we unload it, and we wait and we package everything up at the end of it. But those teams of volunteers are running them.
Is there a qualification process for somebody who's like showing up at Clark Middle School and wants to get food?
Different food pantries, soup kitchens, and distribution sites, depending on who's running them, they will have their own criteria.
So you're not micromanaging them. They decide who needs the food.
They decide who needs the food.
Got it.
Yes.
But it's not just that you pull up and you just like pick up a bunch of food and put it in your car. There's actually a process too.
It could be as easy as, what's your name? How many people are in your household? It could be as easy as that. I don't want this to seem at all like it should be a barrier for folks who are worried about giving their information. There is stigma for a lot of people to come to show up. And my experience with our partners is that there's a spectrum of conversation that they want to have with you, but they're trying to make it as seamless and as low barrier as possible. And I should say, all of our agency partners and all of our distribution partners, we have agreements with them. And so there are stipulations to become a distribution partner. And there's different levels of partnership. We require food safety training. We require, if you're faith-based, we have a non-proselytization clause. And that's all part of our relationship with Feeding America. We are part of that network. And Feeding America is the largest anti-hunger organization in the nation. So I just want to put that caveat out there. So from last year, this is from our annual report from 2024, and we purchased 792,000 pounds of food. We had over 2.7 million pounds of food come in through our USDA commodities programs. And we get a ton of food donated by our retail partners. And retail partners are an enormous part of this equation. And we could not do this without them. And so that was over 4.6 million pounds donated last year through retail and wholesale. And then we do food
is
drives.
that like from like grocery stores, like giving
Safeway.
Giving stuff that's about to expire, or?
So there's a couple ways to look at it, right? You get produce and fresh food, much shorter shelf life. And so we will do grocery rescue is what we call it. And like I said, Fred Meyer, Safeway, the big grocers, cars, Safeway cars. We have a team of volunteers who come in, and all the perishable produce that is donated, we have a team of volunteers every week. They are sorting through the food, picking out the bad strawberries, and that produce we need to turn quickly. So that goes out to our mobile food pantries for distribution. The other grocery rescue, we don't turn any food away, regardless of expiration date, except for baby food. We don't accept expired baby food. You should throw away expired baby food. But any food that does come to us that is too bad to eat. It is well beyond expiration date. It's, dented cans, stuff that humans shouldn't consume. We work with pig farmers in the valley. And so we send it out there in pursuit of zero waste. Food banks are a huge part of food waste reduction, and we strongly believe in that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess to get to the nuts and bolts and getting back to like what I saw in Bethel, I assume that the majority of the food that you are shipping out is non-perishable food.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say it's the middle of winter and you're in a remote village and you're out of food and you're going to go to a partner of the food pantry. What's going to be the food that you receive?
It varies by location. It varies by the types of commodities often that come in. There's a program called TFAP, or the Emergency Food Assistance Program. That program is a USDA commodity program. And so we're leveraging USDA commodity shipments, right? We can look at rice or beans or lentils. Dry goods are often what we're able to most efficiently ship through our system. And that program is so important for us because it also includes shipping and storage dollars. So it doesn't matter how much food I can ship to Bethel if they have no place to store it, right? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about food assistance, it is not just about dollar in, 2 meals out. It is the freezers along the way that need to make that happen. It is the entire supply chain that has to be in place for that to happen.
So back to the question, they're going to get lentils, rice. That'll sort of be the bulk of the weight in the package that they collect.
Yeah.
Would be that sort of thing.
Cereals, grains, again, perishables are much harder to ship. We often ship a lot of water, especially in times of disaster. When we're looking right now out in Western Alaska, water is a huge need. We have seasonal breakup.
And it's heavy.
There. Water is heavy to ship. So if someone in a rural community, they know they have a food pantry in their town that is a partner of Food Bank of Alaska, likely going to see some dry goods and probably a rotating mix of product based on what we're able to get.
Let's say that I picked up a package and it had lentils in it, and I've never served lentils to my family. Is there like instructions for like how to cook this and, what I should add to it to make it tasty?
Oh, great question. Food literacy, right? Recipe literacy, or like how to cook food. And foods you're unfamiliar with is an enormous challenge in anti-hunger work, because at the end of the day, we're humans and we want to eat the foods that are comfortable to us. And there's a wealth of research that says when you eat foods that are comforting to you, you physically can do better, right? It's not just about the comfort and the mental well-being. There is physical outcome for that. And so, the USDA does have some great one-pagers on how to prepare a lot of these commodities. They may not be within the flavor palette that someone has developed living in rural Alaska. And we fully recognize that. We are regularly revisiting this issue and trying to figure out how to better serve, the flavor palette of the seriously diverse cultures that exist within Alaska. We have agencies who are local who come in and they quote unquote shop at Food Bank to get stuff to take back to their pantries. And yesterday on the whiteboard, it was really cool to see 1 pound packets of moose. A hunter had taken a moose, and we pay for the processing at Food Bank. We took it to a certified processor, and that's now moose that we're able to distribute through our agency partners. But the question about how to cook food is a nut we have not cracked as a nation in food assistance.
And I'll just speak for me personally. I'm somebody who could find the time to cook intricate recipes, to learn more, and I don't want to. And I don't think I'm alone.
You are not alone. No, and there's external factors to that too. Life is ever increasing in speed. If you're a parent, or if you are trying to take care of any other, sentient being in your life, it is really hard to make time to cook. For me, it's an enjoyable hobby, right? But for a lot of people, it is the difference between getting McDonald's and looking at that bag of lentils and being like, I don't know. And the mental burden to figure out what to do with this food sometimes is just too much.
And beans, if you're going to soak them overnight,
I know.
It's like a 24-hour plan.
Beans are such a power food, and every nutritionist in the nation is like, I want people to eat more beans. And we have to look to other cultures who have done beans so well since time immemorial. It also takes a lot of energy to cook beans that way, right? You soak them overnight, you got to boil them forever. That is a rub. That is a friction in anti-hunger work.
Okay, so SNAP.
Mm-hmm.
Is the food bank connected with SNAP? Or do those two things have anything to do with each other?
Yes, food banks and SNAP have a lot to do with each other.
And SNAP is, for folks who don't know, it is food stamps.
Yes, formerly known as food stamps. It is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. So what we do at Food Bank of Alaska, we have a SNAP outreach team. The SNAP program is federally funded, and it is co-funded by states. Previous to July 4th, 2025, states paid nothing for the food benefits. So the actual quantity of food, but you could go buy food, that was all paid by the federal government. And the administrative costs to run the program were 50-50, state and fed. There was legislation signed in to law on July 4th, H.R. 1, or some called it the Big Beautiful Bill for, brand awareness, that changed that formula. And we can get into that cost formula reformulation a little bit later. But what we do at Food Bank of Alaska is we help people with their applications for SNAP. And the state of Alaska actually administers the program. So it all goes through the Department of Health's Division of Public Assistance. And they have eligibility technicians who are receiving these applications, going through, making sure all the boxes are checked, and then eventually getting folks their SNAP benefits loaded.
And if someone qualifies for SNAP, you get like a card. It's kind of like a debit card that you would use at the grocery store, and you can buy your groceries using that card. What are just like some basic restrictions?
SNAP food restrictions that is a shifting conversation right now. There are several states in the country that have put in what's called a waiver to the USDA to restrict what you can purchase on SNAP as far as candy and soda especially, right? So SNAP was meant to be supplemental. It is meant to be a little extra money to help you make your food budget work throughout the month. And we are seeing increasingly a call for people to purchase fresh food on SNAP. That's the sentiment of what we're hearing from the federal government in these restrictions.
Part of Make America Healthy Again.
It is. It is part of the call for Make America Healthy Again. But this awareness was happening before MAHA came to the table, I will say. And it makes sense, right? Kids in rural Alaska drinking soda.
Again, I think a lot of Alaskans know this, but for many, many years, it was a lot cheaper to buy a Coke than to buy a bottle of water.
Yes, I'm looking for the stat right now as we're talking. SNAP is not just important to Alaskans in rural Alaska trying to access food. It is critical to retailers. Something like over $280 million was spent in over 500 retailers in 2023 in Alaska. That's real economic power. So I just want to put that on the table as well. This is not just about getting kids access to food.
This is about keeping our grocery stores in business.
This is economic development. Yes, it's a different way to circulate dollars in our community. And we know that $1 of SNAP spent is $1.54 in local economic development. So it does work, and it is the most efficient nutrition program. But you asked me a different question.
I did. Let me make it a more pointed question. There are folks out there who believe that folks on SNAP are using it to buy unhealthy foods, sugary cereals, contributing to the obesity epidemic. I mean, like these are just like some sort of things that you hear, and that we need to make that impossible. That they can't buy sugary foods, they can't buy donuts with their SNAP benefits, because there's a whole, that they're not working, that these are people sitting at home eating donuts, watching TV, and the government's paying.
Stereotypes abound, right? Stereotypes abound, and the picture that you just painted is prevalent around the country. And they're informed by many ideologies and many schools of thought, and honestly, across the political spectrum. So let's unpack some of that, okay? So thinking about choice to food, let's set the baseline there, right? Choice is dignity. So if we want folks to bootstrap themselves up, to use this supplemental program to make their food budget work and do a little bit better every month, to ideally get a job, be contributing to society, all of the talking points about how we want people to get themselves out of poverty, choice is a part of that. Healthful food is also a part of that. And Food Bank of Alaska is committed to increasing access to healthful food. We are also committed to self-defining of what healthful food is. And let me tell you, there are some days I really need a Coca-Cola, right? There are some days, oh my God, I need this donut. Everybody has the right to a comfort food. And that is something that we hold firm on. It gets even more complicated when you get into rural Alaska. We just talked about how hard it is to get perishable food out there. We talked about how hard it is to get perishable food to Anchorage. And so who are policymakers to say, listen, we can't figure out how to get fresh food consistently to your community, but you definitely can't have these other calories because we don't believe in that either. And that results in someone in a rural community getting access to fewer calories, right? And that's where we're at. There are many pie in the sky dreams of like having gardens around the state and everybody has access to fresh food and we're all eating salads. We're not there. And to get there does not look like cutting access to calories right now. So that's the problem. And it's hard because it's a nuanced conversation. It is not black and white. It's not no soda, only water, because we don't have the purchasing mechanisms in place to facilitate that choice.
I just imagine that there's probably some people's cabinets out there that you open it up, there's going to be a few bags of beans that they got like 4 months ago that they're not cooking because it's a huge pain in the ass. And then when you think about like, we paid this money to ship these beans, which weigh a certain amount, to the remotest part of the country, and they're ending up in someone's cabinet for months at a time. Like, maybe we should have said something else.
Yeah. You're describing my cabinets, right? Like there are bags of beans in my cabinets that I bought and I will use, but it's going to be a long time. The point is, the onus of responsibility in this scenario is not on the person who has the beans in the cabinet. It is the system, right? We have many challenges and bottlenecks within our system. So we have to do client feedback. We have to understand what people want, which means you have to talk to people receiving these benefits. You have to do consistent data collection to show change over time, which is an excellent segue into talking about a recent announcement from the USDA saying that after they released the 2024 report, they're discontinuing the USDA Household Food Security Study. And this is something that we are talking to our congressional delegation about. It informs many, many anti-hunger reports that come out every year around the nation. And this is where the rubber meets the road in anti-hunger work. If we don't have the data, we're going to continue to rely ever more on stereotypes and anecdotes. And we will not actually know how many people are hungry in Alaska. And that is a problem.
Speaking about other things happening in the federal government, the federal government is currently shut down. What I've heard is that if the federal government doesn't open up by the end of October, then there will be no SNAP money, period, in November. Is that true? Did I hear that correctly?
You did hear that correctly. So on October 10th, Food and Nutrition Services, FNS, which is a part of the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, they issued a letter that said, due to the shutdown, there are resources to fund SNAP through the end of October, but not beyond. So starting November 1, should this government shutdown continue, there will not be money for SNAP, which for Alaska, just for the month of November, that creates almost a $24 million gap.
How many folks in Alaska rely on SNAP for their food?
1 in 10.
1 in 10. So 1 in 10 people would not be able to afford their groceries for the month of November.
1 in 10 people, at least, remember we talked about the tip of the iceberg, invisible hunger, at least 1 in 10 people are going to have a heck of a time in November putting that puzzle together of their household budget. Yes.
And will that increase the strain on Food Bank of Alaska?
Assuredly. And we can back of the napkin numbers all day. But you talk to Hannah Hill, who's running Breadline up in Fairbanks. They have consistently, month over month, seen increase in their soup kitchen numbers. They're seeing new faces,
this year.
New families. Yeah, this year. So an announcement comes out that says there's not going to be funding for SNAP in November. Anxiety spikes. People start going to food banks. We need to get more food in the cabinets because our card is not going to get loaded in November. So there's that. If that truly doesn't happen, yes, we are definitely going to see increases in food banks and pantries around the state. Here at Food Bank of Alaska, we're pretty clear that we do not do direct client service. And we still have almost 50 people a month walking in looking for help. And we point them in the right direction. But we're seeing an increase. We have heard from partners around our network that some as high as 300% increase in need. So new faces, more families, and just higher volume. And the other part of this, hunger is an outcome of poverty. And so we are part of the entire system that we live in. We have a vested interest in ending poverty, which means we have vested interest in housing and in transportation and in public health. And one of the things that happens when you see hunger spike is you see increased emergency room visits. Hunger is a contributing factor to so many health-related issues. And hunger can just put you over the tipping point. So yes, expect increases in emergency rooms and doctor calls.
I think this is just because it's on people's minds right now with Typhoon Halong happening in the Kuskokwim Delta, and the refugees is not the correct word because they're Alaskans, but Alaskans who are staying in Anchorage. And we're expecting maybe 1,600 at the end of the day from this region who've been displaced from their homes, who are now, at least for the immediate moment, basically living in make-do shelters in Anchorage. Does the food bank play any role in disaster response?
Yes. Yes, we do, and increasingly so. So there's a group called VOAD. We do work with disaster response partners. We have been on all the calls since Saturday. We are definitely part of this conversation, facilitating shipping, figuring out how many containers of food we might need to ship up to the state. Again, there's a lag time there, right? The food we need to ship up isn't going to be here today. We are working and coordinating with all of the players to see what we can do. Shipping water out, like we were talking about. And then even our staff, there was the call that came out for shifts to feed hot food at the Egan Center and the Alaska Airlines Center. And we provide volunteer time for our team to go out and volunteer however they want in the community. And we've already seen plenty of our staff sign up for that. And that's their own time, which I think is pretty cool.
Let's talk about Restaurant Week. It's an annual event you guys have every year called Restaurant Week. It's happening now.
Yes. Thanks for teeing up Anchorage Restaurant Week. I just want to be cognizant of the fact that there is a typhoon and there is a major crisis that is happening in our state right now. And this is on top of what we're hearing potentially about SNAP benefits coming up in November. So,
right. I have to say, I told somebody that I was interviewing you for Restaurant Week, and their face was just like, oh my God, that is so insensitive that you're going to talk about how we all need to go out this week and eat more in restaurants and party on while we have this major disaster happening in Western Alaska.
I swear this is not a tone deaf moment. This all does come together. And I was going back through our emails. I think I emailed you last Thursday and I said, hey, we got this Restaurant Week coming up. Do you want to chat about it? And then the world kind of opened up on Alaska, right? So I thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for taking a turn and talking about these real brass tacks issues that are affecting everyday Alaskans. Our service industry is a part of who we serve in our anti-hunger network.
Because they're low-income workers.
And they're seasonal, right? So when you look at access to benefits, often it's important to account for how much you're working. We in Alaska, our workforce, you look at our fishermen, you look at our firefighters, right? You look at our service and our tourism workers, highly seasonal. So we are a unique animal in our country when you look at folks adapting to be able to meet the requirements of accessing benefits. So right when all of this legislation was going down this summer, we put a blog together about our fishermen and our tourism industry and our service workers. And we found that in households in Alaska, 2 in 5 service workers use SNAP and or Medicaid. And we found that 1 in 3 service workers work seasonally enough that they would not meet new work requirements that were created in this summer legislation. Restaurant Week is squarely in the crosshairs when we talk about anti-hunger work. And so, yes, Anchorage Restaurant Week, let's get into that and let's pull it all together. So Anchorage Restaurant Week has been happening in Anchorage at least since the 1990s. Dine Out Against Hunger, as it used to be called. And so a couple of years ago, locally grown restaurants got a hold of Food Bank of Alaska and said, this Anchorage Restaurant Week type event has been going on for years, and we think it's time to resurrect it, and we think Food Bank should be a part of it. And we were like, yeah, let's do it. It's a feel-good event. We want to talk about our service industry, and we also, love a delicious treat. Our work is really hard.
And I guess like nuts and bolts.
Yep.
A portion of the money that you're spending in the restaurant goes to Food Bank?
So the way this worked is we recruit restaurants, and this year we have 50 restaurants who showed up, and they have committed to a certain level of giving. So they agree to a percentage of sales or a flat fee donation. Every restaurant who jumped in this year also donated a gift card. So this year we have over $2,000 in gift cards to give away on social media contests for folks who go out to a restaurant that's part of the week. They tag us on social media, and you can win a gift card. I am just so touched by how in uncertain times our service industry continues to show up for our community. So from Monday, October 20th through October 26th, you can go to our website. Which is Sunday. Mm-hmm. So it's a Monday through a Sunday. Mm-hmm. And you can dine out at participating restaurants. And we encourage you to visit the website, foodbankofalaska.org, and we have our Anchorage Restaurant Week page. You'll see we've listed the restaurants, we've linked to them. Every restaurant might be offering different deals. Some are still putting together their final touches on their menu. Some menus are several course prefix, or what we call a fixed price. You pay $100 some dollars and you get this delicious experience. Some of it, last year, Beartooth and Moose's Tooth offered 50% proceeds from all of their desserts. So it varies by restaurant. So do your homework, or just go to one of the participating restaurants because they've already committed. They've already donated. So last year, we had 30 restaurants and we raised $20,000. This year, we have 50 restaurants and our goal is $50,000. And part of the way we raise this money is, in addition to the restaurants contributing, diners can individually donate. So you should be seeing these little cards on your tables with QR codes. Diners can do it right there at the table, tip your server, but also consider looking at that QR code and, contributing what you can for the week. And it would just be so cool to see that $50,000 number come in this year.
I think I just like hearing it as a legislator who functions in millions and millions of dollars all the time. That 50,000 doesn't seem like enough.
Yeah, great point. It is not. It is not enough. And this is when I do have these legislative discussions around, what's the dollar number we need to end hunger? Again, we can only talk about our capacity to push food around the state. And what we have to do when we talk about ending hunger is talk about ending poverty. So I agree with you that $50,000 is not enough, but it is an enormous amount to come from our dining industry and our service industry.
But you have an academic background and you've been working on this issue forever in West Africa. What would be the most important steps to ending poverty? And for those folks out there who hate that folks use SNAP, who hate that folks are on Medicaid, who hate that we have folks who are dependent on the government for their survival, what are the best steps towards making it so that less people rely on these programs?
Oh, God, what a great question. You have to listen to the people experiencing these problems, right? Nothing about us without us is the term we use a lot in Alaska. And it cannot be prescriptive. The solution has to be co-created. But we have a ton of data that shows us a point in the right direction. We know that household poverty actually went down after COVID because of the child tax credit. We know that when people got what's called undirected cash infusions, and we have seen this repeated around the world, we do it here with the PFD. We know poverty can temporarily go down because of undirected cash.
Well, there's an ICER study that showed that birth weights went up in years of higher PFDs. I heard about it on the record, and I actually didn't believe it. It was actually being presented by Senator Shelley Hughes at the time, and I had to apologize because I pulled it up, and ICER did have a study showing that birth weights did go up in years of higher PFD amounts.
Yes, there it is, right? And this has been replicated around the world. We know this. So I hate to make it so simple because it is not, but it's more money pointing towards the right things. So you look at tax credits, you look at undirected cash infusions, you look at livable wage, but you also have to look at housing costs. We know we're in a childcare crisis in this town. We know there are people choosing not to have children because it is unaffordable. All of these pieces come together to create a community that can support thriving families. It takes everything right now.
Well, Rachael Miller, last question. Do you have a book to recommend?
I have so many books. Yeah.
Okay, just pick one.
Check out Begging for Change by Robert Egger. A little bit of the history of food banking and understanding how this sector developed. I think your question earlier, framing the folks who hate the fact that people are using government assistance to survive every day, right? I will tell you the people on those programs also hate the fact that they are on these programs, right? You have to be in a pretty rough spot to access Medicaid. If you've got a family of 4, you need to be pretty broke to access SNAP. So they don't want to be on this either. So back to your original question, I think that you need to listen to the people experiencing these problems. We call it lived experience.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akeleg.gov or call 907-269-0123.